is Brother Taj, and you're listening to Hot Button, my radio show. Appreciate everybody coming in. I'm broadcasting on the DSOC Broadcast Network. It's another wonderful Thursday night here in Aurora, Colorado at the Dayton Street Opportunity Center, where I am broadcasting from. You can hear me live on www.radio.zrock, that's rock with a K, .org, and also it's going to be rebroadcast again as usual on www.radio.daytonstreetoc.com. Want to give a shout out to Dayton Street Opportunity Center for once again hosting me in the building. I'm on live with my peoples. I'm in the building with my producer Z-Rock. Z-Rock, say what's up to the peoples. Yeah. There he is. So as always, I'm not here unless Z-Rock is. So I'm riding in the boat that he's captaining. Want to welcome everybody back for another weekly installment of Hot Button. Check in real quick on my live. I'm always on Facebook Live. Probably most of my listeners are on Facebook Live, man. I really appreciate that stuff for real. Go down here. There's Nando, my boy. Let's see who else is on here. Latifa, assalamu alaikum, sis. Riyadh, my brother, from another. You got the face like there's my boy Skip. What's going on, Skip? My brother. There's my brother Umar. And there's Kwame. What's going on? Sister Tavisha, Misunderstood, one of my favorite rappers in the whole wide world, is listening in. It's such a blessing. So a lot of stuff to talk about. It's been like I've had like a long weekend. It's probably been, let's see, today's Thursday, so my weekend really began last Thursday. So it's been like a week-long weekend, yo. I went because let's see, last weekend, what did I do last weekend, man? Like last weekend, I was like I went out to the mountains, worked through the weekend, and then went back to the mountains, and then came back actually today, man. Just got back in town actually earlier today. So it's been like a crazy time, but really just a lot of, there's those things that you do and you can't really tell people that you did it. I did that and just had a blast, man. Connected with some really dope people. Went out in the middle of nowhere, did some bow and arrow shooting and some other types of shooting, did some training and stuff, taught some people some things, and just hung out with friends and fam and just had really a great time, except it was just cold as hell, man. I really hate when it gets cold, like when it flirts with like single digit temperatures. I can't stand that. I'm a sun person, man. I'm like a snake. I'm cold blooded. I'll sit out in the middle of the sun on a rock somewhere because I can't stand the cold, man. But it's just been a long weekend, really, and just had a great time. I hope everybody had a wonderful week and a wonderful holiday. Got around, I was fortunate to be around a bunch of black people, so it was some great food jumping off. I obviously, as a Muslim, I don't celebrate Christmas, but I don't hide out, and I certainly enjoy watching people celebrate their holidays. I think that whatever the holiday is that you celebrate, especially if you celebrate it from a standpoint of sincerity and goodwill and all of that, then more power to you. And if you're cooking, I'm probably coming over anyway, so I'm gonna do that. Hey, I want to give a shout out to my sis Tahira, because she made, man, like before I jetted out of town, I got this banana pudding pie, and I talked about it last week, so I went and got it. But this thing is like if you ever okay, so like in my religion, right? Like, okay, so in Islam we believe in heaven and hell, right? And of course, like these are concepts, like heaven and hell are things that I've never really seen, but I certainly believe in them. But it's interesting, like there's traditions in our religion about like the prophet talking about his actual observation of heaven. Like he saw heaven and he was trying to relate to the believers like what it was like. And again, I don't know that if anyone can really relate. I mean, if you understand what heaven is, you understand it's not something that you can really relate to somebody in terms of really what the experience is. I mean, we read about it in the Quran and a little bit in the Bible, but the vision of what heaven and hell is nothing like the actual reality, which is ironic because it's kind of even hard to relate what the reality is. But I think that when I ate this banana pudding cheesecake thing that Tahira put together, man, I'm almost sure this didn't come. This came from heaven. Like it was like if you like got a piece of cloud from it and put it in a pie pan, gave it to somebody. This is what that was, man. This is throws down. If you checked me out last week on my Facebook, you saw a picture of it, and then you can see the link to Tahira, sorry, Tahira, because she's trying to make them joints. She's like a jack of all trades, kind of like me a little bit. She's a comedian, funny as hell. Definitely a local gem, and this is like her side hustle, man. So if you get a chance, holler at her, man. Get one of them joints, man. That joint was delicious. What else? What else did I do, man? I did like a whole bunch of stuff, but I don't remember a whole lot of it. What are we going to talk about today? Let's do our regular Yo President joint. How about that? We're going to do that. Do a little bit about that. Because we always, that's like a sex, that's like, now it's like a patented section of my show, man. We're going to talk about Yo President. That's Y-O apostrophe president. You know, black people, we use apostrophes for everything, man, even when they're not. I think we overuse apostrophes, man. We use them when they're not necessary. But we're gonna use it. Yo, president, we're gonna talk about that. Not nothing, not a whole lot specific about, but here's like one of the things that I thought was interesting that I heard over the weekend was, or over the week, was about, like, we know that one of Trump's things is like repealing everything that is Obama, right? And it was interesting that he had finally sort of tried to peel back, or actually did peel back the wildlife ban, or the United States ban on elephant trophies. And I was thinking like this guy's intent to peel back Obama is so like deliberate. I mean, he is so into trying to like obliterate everything Obama that he would even regulations that, I mean, I think it's important to protect elephants. I mean, obviously, I mean that we need to. I mean, we're the caretakers of the earth, and you know, the elephant hunting is crazy, and there are actually species of elephants that are endangered because of hunting, and especially because of the want and the greed for ivory, right? And so Obama, one of the things that Obama did, and I want to say this was back in 2014, was ban the import of elephant trophies. This then helped sort of put the check on sport hunting of elephants. And Trump, there was some flirting about this early on, actually, in his campaigning, and a lot of hunters were like hoping that he would actually reverse this early on in his after his just immediately after his inauguration, early on into his presidency, and he sort of flirted with it. I think what is this, December, even like last month, I want to say, or October, November, there was, I think it came up, and he was not really committing to reversing it, and kind of pissed off a few more than one hunter, but just recently decided to go ahead and peel that one back. And you know, notwithstanding the whole issue about big game hunting, I was like, man, this dude really, you know, I always felt that he was deliberately going after the Obama legacy, certainly. But like, like this dude is like going all out. You could almost sort of excuse him when he wanted to like repeal Obamacare because we gave it that name. The ACA, we gave it the sort of the moniker Obamacare, and you could excuse him for wanting to repeal it. But underneath that was still this thing of he wants to just obliterate, do what the old pharaohs did and just obliterate, the forerunner. But this is not necessary. I mean, it's not um, to reverse the ban. It's unnecessary, and the idea is, look, it's not, elephants are not like wolves, or there's not like a surplus of them running around in the earth tearing up stuff, and so you can actually, it's okay to protect them. You don't have to. We don't have to have um, their tusks running around. And actually, interesting enough, like most of the tusks that you see and things that are imported as elephant tusks are fake anyway. A lot of the quote unquote ivory that's being sold on the market that people assume to be actually real is actually fake. But it just seems so unnecessary that it 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 seems more about, and this is sad because it should be about the elephants, but this is really just another example of Trump just kind of overdoing, and wanting to go after Obama. But then then there's the recent polls that have come out about Trump's favorability, which uh, you know is down in the tank. At almost 80%, either when asked, are we worse off or better off under Trump? 80% between like mixed and worse off, as opposed to 20 some percent saying that we're better off. So that in itself, plus a mid 30s, I believe the last time I looked, mid 30s approval rating. And then what was the last? There was a poll that still has like Obama as the most popular, well loved president going 10 straight years now. I'm sure that Trump is just not happy, and it's nice to see at least public opinion, sort of belying what Trump is actually attempting to do in terms of obliterating his legacy. I mean, sure, the mandate in terms of like Obamacare, the actual individual mandate is peeled back by the tax reform. That is probably, if anything, is probably the biggest accomplishment of Trump's career so far, which is honestly, I mean, if we're going to be honest, passing a sweeping tax reform is not a small thing. It really is not. I would suspect, though, it's something that would be expected, like if it was Obama in office, because this dude did everything. But it's not. In all fairness, passing tax reform of any kind, to be quite honest, is not a small thing. But look, let's be honest, though. Again, if you sat and you asked Trump to just explain it like in 60 seconds, he probably wouldn't be able to really tell you what that tax reform was really about, even in a nutshell. I seriously doubt that he has a grasp of it. So this is something that you can at least sort of put a check mark in Congress's their column, that this was certainly um, a bipartisan effort, and definitely needed. I don't know. I mean, the jury is still out in terms of, I mean, from an individual standpoint, we are going to get a break in our taxes, but for the most part, the people that do benefit from this are corporations, and definitely not, everyday Joe, the plumber, type person in a general sense. But I think overall, in terms of a tax reform, it was certainly needed. And this is a step, I think, in the right direction in terms of Congress getting something done. But it's interesting. This is the biggest accomplishment in so far in Trump's presidency, which I don't know is saying that much, to be quite honest. I don't know. I doubt it. What's clear is, and what is clear is that Trump is benefiting from the prior administration's efforts. There hasn't been any real debacles or any real conflicts or any real crisis that Trump has had to really deal with in comparison, especially in comparison to Obama, who came into office and had to basically save the country, save banking, save the auto industry. I mean, all of these things right from the jump. And Trump has benefited from a lot of the effort of the president and of Congress as well, even though they were pretty gridlocked. But Trump is certainly benefiting from that. And so he's had a relatively crisis-free presidency, which is probably why he can spend a lot of time on Twitter. But outside of that, I don't know. Who knows? But I thought that was pretty interesting in terms of really what he's doing. I don't know what he's doing next. I don't know what's up next for the president because there's not a whole lot really to deal with. So we'll see. I want to segue from that into what the Democrats need to be doing, because as things sort of calm down, and especially as we get past the holiday, I guess, so to speak, and into the new year, and into the next year of Trump's presidency, it's much more imperative for the Democrats to come up with a strategy for the next election cycle, especially in the presidency. We're seeing a lot of bubbling, I think, nationwide in terms of Democratic involvement in a lot of the local elections, a lot of the state elections. There are most of the elections where, especially where there's incumbent Republicans, there aren't many of them that Democrats aren't contesting. And that's interesting because I don't think people realize that in a lot of states and in a lot of places within states, you have one-party races. You have really, especially you like, if we sort of put the spotlight on the Republicans, there are a lot of races where Republicans are running and Democrats are just not even showing up. And Alabama was historically one of those places, even if we go back to, let's say, the early 60s, where and not necessarily Republicans, but you have one party race, especially the Democrats. Democrats had locks in places throughout Alabama where the Republican Party was just not even present. They didn't even have an actual party office in a lot of these places. And I mentioned this before. This is kind of where this actual occurrence is what gave birth to the precursor of the Black Party, the Black Panther Party. And so, and interesting enough, now, like, history's sort of repeated itself because Alabama is now sort of ground zero for, I think, in my opinion, what Democratic strategy is. The Democrats lost the election because they made the mistake of putting themselves on cruise control. In terms of the overall, like, the DNC. The DNC was on cruise control because they really, really, really thought that they could use the momentum of Obama and the things that he did, especially in terms of managing crises and putting America on a much more even keel in terms of economics and things like that. And they felt like they could sort of cruise control and that they had, like, the perfect person in the driver's seat in terms of Hillary. And they didn't pay attention. I mean, Bernie Sanders was sort of was really the warning shot for the Democrats, because within their own party was this reminder to them that, they shouldn't be on cruise control and that Hillary Clinton wasn't necessarily the shoo-in candidate that they were assuming. And had they the problem with the Democrats is that they didn't manage that. I mean, it was the writing was on the wall, and had they understood that and strategized properly in terms of how they dealt with Bernie Sanders, then they would have, I think, as a default, based on the proper strategy, would have certainly beat Trump, not just in the popular vote, but also among the electoral college. The what they looked at Bernie Sanders as sort of a thorn in their side instead of really the warning shot, and that was their problem. I don't know from a strategy standpoint. I mean, we saw some of the early mistakes, like the Democrats put forth Hillary as like the wise grandma, which was the dumbest strategy ever. Like, we've already had like a lot of controversy in terms of having like old candidates, right? Like we've been looking for like Kennedy really ever since Bob Dole ran, right? Like when Bob Dole ran, we were like, oh my God, we can't have an old ass president with one hand. Like, that's just not going to fly. And it was one of the problems with also McCain. Like, in most Americans' minds, we were like, nah, we really want, we need some youth. And this is one of the reasons why Obama was elected. I mean, at the end of the day, he was a young, charismatic person running against an old geezer. And so to come back to that and put forth an old geezer and be like the wise grandma, it was like, nah, that's not going to work. And so they tried to revamp that, and then made the mistake of making her the anti-Trump, which was also a mistake as well. So the issue was, where did the Democrats go wrong? Where did they go wrong? And even now, I think that they are making a mistake. And so if they're probably not listening, because I don't have, but they need to be listening to me. One is because, I've done this whole strategy thing. Where they're making the mistake now is they are trying to appeal to the Trump base. And I'm just using that term loosely. The Trump base is that rural, sort of redneck, salt of the earth, voter who elected Trump. And they're trying to appeal to that base because they figure, well, if this is the base that came out and voted overwhelmingly and got Trump over the hump, then we need to appeal to them to bring them into the fold. And I think that they're making a mistake by doing that. And again, if we go back to Alabama, they're pretty much the sort of the template for what the strategy is, because the bottom line is the Trump base is going to vote Trump base. I mean, they're going to vote for Trump, and I don't know that there is a lot that the Democrats can do to sway them, because it. And here's why. I think that there is a disconnect between reality and what they perceive. And there's not, when that happens, there's not a whole lot, because what you want to do is be like, well, let's bring them back to reality. But if there's a disconnect between what really is going on, then that strategy is not going to work. And I don't want to and I'm not saying this to insult Trump voters or the Trump base, but the reality is that there were ideas that they voted on and voted about that have nothing to do with what actually is happening. And that's because of perception. In the same way, you can see sort of where this occurs when we talk about racism. There is a cognitive dissonance, a total disconnect with reality when you try to say to a lot of the base that there is racism, because the pushback is there isn't racism and there used to be, but you need to get over it, or even worse, like I don't have the white privilege that you guys are all talking about, blah 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 blah, right? And so what happens is it creates an argument and a point and a counterpoint. And unfortunately, in between those two things is this real disconnect. The solution to it is really for people to come off the farm and have and become connected to the people who have these valid viewpoints and these valid even complaints, and or vice versa. Because here's the thing: there is, I mean, the concerns and the fears of the Trump base is real. I mean, I mean, these are people who are paying bills and paying taxes and trying to earn money, and they're not any different than anyone else. So their fears and concerns are real, and their vote was a protest because what they were trying to say is nobody understands us. And to be honest, when you talk about racism, or you talk about not necessarily racism, but when you talk about race and you talk about the perceptions of black and white, they are very different. And the problem is, because they are different, there isn't a lot of bridge building between the two, right? And so they both sides sort of are stubborn in, my viewpoint is valid and I really don't give a damn about your viewpoint. And that's the problem. So from a democratic strategy, it's hard to build that bridge to say, look, there is some reality in terms of economics and economics disparity. And until you see that, it's going to remain a problem. And the idea of building those bridges, I don't know, is a good, especially in the short term, is not a strategy that's going to pay off for the Democratic Party. If you look at also where they failed, they just failed to get the Obama vote. That's where they failed. And that's where the solution is for them from a strategic standpoint, is stop trying to appeal to the Trump base, because they're still going to vote for Trump. They're still going to, and again, let's look at Alabama, because Judge Moore was Trump, right? He was Trump Jr. in a sense. And you saw that people were very clear, who were Trump-based supporters, that I'm going to vote for Roy Moore, and I don't care that he's a pedophile, and I don't care that he's 80 billion years old. I don't care that he's a misogynist. I don't care that he has character issues. I'm still going to vote for him because he is representative of what I voted for when I voted for president. And that was clear. I mean, there was, I saw that very clear. There was like a brief interview with a white lady who they were like, do you have any concerns about Roy Moore given A, B, C, D, and E, and all of the bad stuff that you can come up with Roy Moore? And she gave a one-word answer that said everything. She said, no, I have no concerns whatsoever. And this really revealed, like, you've got to be disconnected from reality. If you don't have a problem voting for someone in office who is technically supposed to be like your representative, right? It's supposed to represent your interests and your wants and your needs. And I'm just saying that theoretically. But in a theoretical standpoint, this is your representative, because we have a representative government. And if you have no problem voting for someone to represent you, who is a suspected, let's be okay, I'll be like honest, a suspected and alleged pedophile, and a suspected and alleged misogynist, a clear racist. Like, if you have no problem putting someone to represent you who is all of these things, then one of two things is, because that's who you are, or you just don't believe it, or if you do believe it, it's doesn't matter. And all of those reasons, all of those situations are problems. And I don't know that it's worth, from my standpoint, I would be like, I don't know if I'm going to waste much time, if any, to try to persuade that type of person to then, come over to my side. I don't know, because either you just like you have your head so far in the sand or up your own butt, or you are just really, you got some character issues yourself. And I'm like, I would rather be like, why don't you stay over there? So what's left then? Well, again, let's look at what happened in Alabama, because Trump Jr. was upset, right? Because this was an upset. The Doug Jones upset um, Roy Moore. So it was an upset. And the reason why it was an upset was clearly the black vote. And here's the thing about Doug Jones that wasn't, I said this before, that I didn't hear a lot about from in the sense of the Democratic strategy and the Democratic um, effort there. Now there was a wonderful Democratic effort, a grassroots effort. The Democrats used a political strategist who came up with this real salt of the earth campaign. And interestingly enough, the strategists in part is this the strategists are is in part black owned, so that was smart by the Democrats. But what they did was they engaged in black leadership and the black media in Alabama. I want to say the name of the strategy, Pine Street Strategies. So if you get a chance, look up Pine Street Strategies. But they engaged the black community and black media, and they targeted the black vote, and they targeted the black vote, not just the voter, the registered black voter, but the registered black voter, or the unregistered black voter, and also the registered black voters who generally didn't vote in local and municipal elections, which is, again, Alabama is like the template for the nation, because for the most part, black people, we get interested in the presidential election, and it takes a minute for us to be motivated to actually vote in the presidential election, but we are totally invisible and absent when it comes to the local stuff. The state and the municipal stuff goes right by us, and we don't understand that is where the most effectiveness for our vote is, and that's also where ground zero is in terms of the policies that affect us, especially from a detrimental standpoint. And Ferguson is one of those examples. The city of Ferguson was a great example of what happens when you have a whole bunch of black people that have no interest in politics. Then the minority passes all of these ordinances and laws that basically suck you dry, and then you get mad when they kill one of you, and then all of a sudden, it's a protest and we want to tear up some shit. But fortunately, what has happened in the aftermath of Ferguson is that we've seen an increase in political involvement. There are people who protested the Jones killing, and they are now actually part of the government now. A lot of couple young people who are part of the city council, and so on and so on. So Alabama is now that. The Democratic strategy for the nation has to be to engage the black vote, to get more black people to get registered to vote, to get more black people to be interested in the politics, and not just interested, but also understand local politics, and therefore carry that on into the national election. That is the strategy. Alabama is the template. If the Democrats do not follow this, if they do not follow that strategy, they keep going after the Trump voter, which is, they are stubborn in their viewpoint, and they're stubborn in where they're gonna vote for Trump regardless. Trump can do no wrong as far as they're concerned, and I don't know that they have a grasp on what the actual politics and economics around them it really is. I just don't, and I'm saying that, and I'm being general about saying that, but if you just, again, if you ask one that says, hey, here's your president who likes to grab coochies, and you say, it doesn't matter, I'm going to vote for him anyway. then that means you really don't know what's going on. I mean, that's sort of where I land at. If you're just going to vote anybody into office, it really means that you have no idea about what's going on around you. And I don't know that, I think that person is a lost cause. I'm gonna be honest, that person is a lost cause. And from a democratic strategy and from a mathematical strategy, it's okay. It's okay to consider that, because what you want to do is you want to get the voters who are the ones that you can persuade, and that primarily is that Obama vote that the Democrats did not turn out in the last presidential election. So if they're listening, then they're smart to follow my advice. But that black vote was so the black vote, and in general, and I really think the black women vote is key, because there's no question in my mind that that's what saved at least Alabama from Roy Moore. I wonder if there was a larger turnout, because as I said, that political strategists in Alabama, they did have a grassroots thing. But the one thing I did not see, one thing about Doug Jones, like historic, like there's a lot of history. Like I am about history. Like I look at like the political things that happen now, and I wonder, well, what's the history behind this, right? Like Alabama was interesting in that I went back and said, oh yeah, this is how the Black Panther Party came to light back in the 60s, et cetera, et cetera. And I wondered what would have happened had they really harped on the fact that Doug Jones was the prosecutor of the perpetrator of the Birmingham church bombing. Like that, you know what I'm saying? Like that should have been like out front. Like it should have been out front that here was this crusader for the rights, the actual human rights. So it's not even a civil rights issue. The actual human rights of black people, right? Now, for me, I'd have been like, it'd been nice to have a black candidate. Okay, but let's, at least with the white candidate, here was somebody who was notable in the fact that he was the prosecutor of the person who was, who perpetrated the bombing and was found guilty of it. And there wasn't much, like from a historical standpoint and from a campaign standpoint, there wasn't a lot said about that. It was like Doug Jones, and a lot of people were like, who the hell is Doug Jones? And the only thing that people knew about Doug Jones was he wasn't Roy Moore. But had that really been an issue that had been really put forth, I think that the turnout would have even been greater. Again, this is something that for me is an indicator for the Democrats on a national level in terms of strategy that they should take. So anyway, that's my political take, and that's my stuff about your president. We're going to take a quick break, and we are going to be back with the next segment of Hot Button with Brother Taj. So hang on, and we'll be back.
Democrat or a Republican, nor an American. I speak as a victim of America's so-called democracy. You and I have never seen democracy. All we've seen is hypocrisy. We don't see any American dream. We've experienced only the American nightmare. And the generation that's coming up now can see it and are not afraid to say it. If you go to jail, so what? If you're black, you were born in jail. If you black, you were born in jail. In the North as well as the South. Stop talking about the South. Long as you south of the Canadian border, you're South. This is why I say it's the ballot or the bullet. It's liberty or it's death. It's freedom for everybody or freedom for nobody.
And this brother stopped me and asked me, yo, what's up with that brother Chucky D? He swear he nice. I said, yo, the brother don't swear he nice. He knows he's nice, you know what I'm saying? So Chuck, I got a feeling you turning into a public enemy, man. Now remember that line you was kicking to me on the way out to LA Lounge in Queens while we was in the car on our way to the shop? Well, yo, right now, kick the bass for them brothers and let them know what goes on.
Rolling stones in the rap game, not bragging. Lip bigger than Jagger, not sagging. Roll it backwards, I'ma leave it at that. They ain't got nothing to do with rap. Check the facts, expose those cats who pose as heroes, take advantage of blacks. The government's gangsters, so cut the crap. A war going on, so where y'all at? Fight the power, cause great responsibility. F the police, who's stopping you from killing me? Disasters, fiascos, or loop by PE. If it's Einstein, we believe in TV. Spreading riches, bitches, this new thing about snitches. Watch the masses move as the masses switches. System distant, but barely missed her. My soul intention to save my brothers and sisters. Get up,
Just like that.
get up, get up,
Just like that.
get up,
Just like that.
get up, get up.
Just like that. Yeah, that's right, Chuck, man. That's what you gotta do. You got to tell them just like that. You know what I'm saying? Cause yo, man, let me tell you a little something, man. These brothers running around, hard-headed, they get a little jealous, you know what I'm saying? Just like that. You know, they try to bring you down with them. But yo, Chuck, you got to tell them just like that.
Screaming gangster 20 years later. Of course, endorsed while conscience is faded. New generations believe in them fables. Gangster boogie on 2 turntables. Show no love, so it's easy to hate it. Desecrated while the coroner waited. Any given Sunday, so where y'all raided? With slavery lynching and them drugs infiltrated. Like that doll Chucky, baby. Keep coming back to live love life like I'm crazy. Keep it moving, rising to the top. Duck fresh, clean living, you don't stop. Revolution means change, don't look at me strange. So I can't repeat what other rappers be saying. If you don't stand for something, you fall for anything. Harder than you think is a beautiful thing. Get up,
Just like that.
get up, get up,
Just like that.
get up, get up,
Just like that.
get up, get up.
Just like that. Yeah, that's right, Chuck, man. That's what you gotta do. You got to tell them just like that. You know what I'm saying? Cause yo, man, let me tell you a little something, man. These brothers running around, hard-headed, they get a little jealous, you know what I'm saying? Just like that. You know, they try to bring you down with them. But yo, Chuck, you got to tell them just like that.
So it's time to leave you a preview, so you too can review what we do. 20 years in this business, how you sell soul, she wins. People bear witness. Thank you for letting us be ourselves. So don't mind me if I repeat myself. These simple lines be good for your health. To keep them crime rhymes on the shelf. Live love life like you just don't care. 5,000 leaders never scared. Rain and noise is the moment they feared. Get up, still a beautiful idea. Get up, throw your hands in the air. Get up, and show no fear. Get up if y'all really care. You need 20 years, now get up.
That's right. We're public enemy number 1 in New York. Public enemy number 1 in Philly. Public enemy number 1 in DC. Public enemy number 1 in Cleveland, Ohio. Also, we're public enemy number 1 in St. Louis. Public enemy number 1 in New Jersey. And Buzzing. We're also public enemy number 1 in Cincinnati. In Atlanta. We're public enemy number 1 in Chicago. Public enemy number 1 in Detroit. Public enemy number 1 in Oakland. Public enemy number 1 in Baltimore. Public enemy number 1 in Miami. Public enemy number 1 in Indiana. Also public enemy number 1 in LA. Also with public enemy number
Yo, this is Brother Taj with Hot Button. We're back here broadcasting on the DSOC Broadcast Network, www.radio.zrock, that's rock with a K, .org, and also rebroadcast on www.radio.daytonstreetoc.com. I'm here again in Aurora, Colorado, 14th of Dayton at the Dayton Street Opportunity Center, broadcasting live at you. I want to welcome everybody that's listening in and everybody that's listening in and watching on my Facebook Live as well. I want to give a shout out to my niece, all the way out in St. Louis, being a knucklehead, but I love her. All right, man, I got nieces, like this is an actual niece. I got like 87 nieces, man. Like I've been so fortunate because I've been, especially in the Denver, Colorado state Muslim community, man. I've been here for a minute, and it's like a lot of people that I watched as kids, right, are now like grown adults, and so they're all like my nieces and nephews. I got like 87 of them joints, man. It's just, and it's so wonderful to see them. It's kind of weird for me because I'm like, I still feel like I'm 25, but I'm clearly like 50 compared to these, because these are, these are like people that well into their adulthood, that I watched grow up. Some of them reminded me, especially if I hadn't seen them for a while. I'm like, man, they're like, yeah, dude, yeah, you like grew up under you, like, and I'm like, oh, I forgot. I remember I ran into my boy Anis. I had forgotten who he even was, and he was Anis is this hip hop poet, activist, just really dope all around individual. And I remember listening to some of his music, and so I reached out to him, not knowing who he was. I was like, yo, Assalamu alaikum, I love your music. I've downloaded some joints and whoop whoop whoop. And he was like, dude, like, why are you acting like you don't know who I am? And I was like, I don't know who you are. And he's like, yeah, you're an idiot. Grew up with you, man. And I was like, oh. But anyway, again, shout out to my actual niece, but also shout out to all my billions of nieces and nephews out there, man. My brother Riyadh brings up a good point. I want to touch on it just a little bit. Again, speaking of politics and things, about the Democrats in general. Now, look, so personally, like, I worked for a while, over a decade, in market research and messaging, and the bulk of that was in political market research. And I also had really the privilege and the blessing of working for two presidents. When I started my career in that, I worked for President Clinton, and then at least wrapped up the political portion. I actually moved into more corporate stuff, but I wrapped up the political portion of my career working for Barack Obama. And also along the way, not just for the presidents, but also for the Democratic National Committee. And so I have sort of an affinity for the Democrats, but from a personal standpoint, like, I'm registered as an independent voter. And I also, and my standpoint in politics, again, was more historical, because if you look at especially from the Black perspective and Black history, our major affinity was to the Republican Party. From a general standpoint, until they got stupid. But for the large, especially in the South, I mean, the Democrats, that was just basically the Ku Klux Klan party. And so, of course, when Black people began becoming politically active, they expressed their affinity, and even formally so. If you study the Black politics and the burgeoning of Black activism in politics, you will see declarations, especially throughout the South, of an affiliation to the Republican Party. And so and it's interesting and ironic that, from a historical standpoint, things have flipped, and now, Black affinity is to the Democratic Party. But it's interesting because they haven't necessarily reconciled their own history with being basically the party of racism and the party of the Klan, with now, like, oh man, we're the party of Obama. That is, there's some schizophrenia still there in the Democratic Party, but let's not get it twisted. That also poses a dilemma for us as Black people. Like, how much trust do we put in any one of the parties? How much trust do we put in the Democrats, in terms of, especially a lot of the policies that they've put in place historically, especially in the inner cities? Sort of the liberal viewpoint that has basically sort of patted us on the top of the head. Oh, you poor Black people, and let's put all these things in place to take care of you. And bam, now we got projects and welfare. So Riyadh does bring up a good point, that as while the Republican Party has sort of almost become like a clown fest, and really just white as hell. Like, did you guys see, like, the convention, the Republican convention? I swear to God, there were like 4 Black people in that whole place. And they were all in one place. Like, like it was really bad. But it's interesting. Like, here again, my thing is I try to look at different paradigms. If I was a Republican Party, I would really understand. Like, it was sort of like I remember they came out with a campaign. It was like a billboard campaign where they were like we're the party of Martin Luther King. And you saw, like, they were saying, yeah, MLK was a Republican. And it was sort of like a half-hearted, half-assed sort of campaign. But in reality, like if they were smart, if the Republicans were smart, and I don't think they are, but if they were, they would really go after the black vote, especially and take advantage of of where they were historically. But that also means an overhaul of a lot of their stupid attitudes and really a check of the vanguard, which is a bunch of old white people. But guess what? On the other side for the Democrats, there's a bunch of old white people that are the vanguard as well. So I don't know. Let's go back to Alabama real quick. I think that the one thing about again, if we go back to the birth, or at least the precursor of the Black Panther Party, that was really that came from a section in Alabama right outside of Montgomery, where again it was just the Democratic Party that was present, and the black people said, began. I mean, you had like Stokely Carmichael and company come into Alabama and get people registered, and then they said, okay, we got this base now. What do we do? Do we join the Democratic Party, the people that wanted to hang us and try to take over, which is not going to happen, or do we explore this crazy idea of forming our own political party? And that's exactly what they did. Now, in the long run, the political party that they formed fizzled out. But I think the tradition of it and really what it meant lived on, because even though that political party fizzled out, the members trickled, of course, back into the Democratic Party. But they also then began winning winning elections, and that's part of what made the Democratic Party turn around. It also, that attitude is what gave birth to the actual Black Panther Party in Oakland, although that wasn't so much a political party as much as a social activism organization. But I think that for me, I think that it's a thing that, we can explore. Would water down the vote, of course, but I think that there is, it creates an avenue for black activism to say, look, we can. I mean, there was a discussion I've been observing on my Facebook with like H Soul and others who, and someone brought up the idea of, like we shouldn't like engage in the political system, and we should create our own. The idea, theoretically, I support. I think from a practical standpoint, no, but we can certainly create our own political parties. Will we win, or will that really push over our influence? I don't know, but I think it's worth exploring and actually worth doing from a standpoint of getting people involved. I certainly think that. So I don't think that we should drink the Democratic Party Kool-Aid at all. But I do think that we underestimate our power and our responsibility in terms of citizenship. And I think we got to stop doing that, because if we continue to do that, if we think that our vote doesn't count, if we think that everything is so rigged that we just stay home, then we don't have anything to complain about when Roy Moore and Donald Trump are elected. There's nothing for us to complain about if we just sit home and twiddle our thumbs. So anyway, but that was a good point, Riyadh, and I appreciate you making that point about not necessarily drinking that Democratic Kool-Aid. So there was a piece I was going to talk about last week, Z-Rock, about Brianna Brochu and Jazzy Rowe. There was some of the news that came out. So Brianna was the white girl from Hartford who basically poisoned her roommate Jazzy, basically taking her toothbrush and sticking it in her butt and putting old clam dip in her lotion, shampoo or whatever, just like really doing the most in terms of basically like poisoning this sister. And she was charged with, I think she's charged with criminal mischief and some other weird, count. But the criminal mischief is probably the most serious. I think that's a felony, I believe, or at least that count is a felony count. And the latest news, because she was charged with that from the jump, so we know that. She went to court, pled guilty, and the idea is when she went to court, this is about a week and a half ago, They were looking to actually add, they were hoping to add an enhancer, a hate crime enhancer, because the idea is, look, she did this because, you know, the woman was a black woman, and she had made sort of comments, at least about her race. And this, the hate crime enhancer was not added to the disappointment of, obviously, the black community, and especially the local NAACP, which I thought was interesting, because the president of the Hartford NAACP is a Muslim brother, so I thought that was interesting. An actual, I think he used to be an imam of one of the mosques out there in Hartford, but I thought that was an interesting Muslim twist on it. But I just, look, you know, from a legal standpoint, I try to understand why, because, you know, legalese and litigation can be very technical, and I try to look at it outside of again, the lens that's tinged by race and by our the black experience with the legal system, which has never been good at all. And you know, so I try to be the devil's advocate and say, well, you know, when is a hate crime count even considered, and why would it not be, et cetera, et cetera. And to be honest, you know, the idea is that, at least put forth by her in her defense, by Breonna's defense, is that what she did was not racist. She wasn't being racist. She was being an asshole and being a bad roommate. And I understand that if you want to prove racism, you have to have some proof, and something that's overwhelming, at least at one, or at least convincing. And I don't know that. I mean, she made one comment. You know, this was, you know, her roommate talking about Jazzy was a Jamaican Barbie doll, and again, I know, like, you know, that my instinct is, yeah, of course, you know, she could have just said she was a Barbie doll. Like, why Jamaican? You know, and the reason why she said Jamaican is, in my opinion, because she's a racist. But again, trying to be devil's advocate, I could see why that's not overwhelming evidence to prove racism and then prove that what she did was a hate crime. And I give her that. But it just, I remember my knee jerk was, look, you know, poisoning a black woman in the United States ain't a hate crime, which is, you know, telling and an indication of status quo. It has always been hard to prove that the discrimination and the mistreatment of a black person was, quote unquote, morally and legally wrong, especially when there is just an overwhelming history and clear, like, legislation that, you know, I mean, from the Dred Scott decision on forward, where it was like, you know, look, black people ain't even human. They shouldn't even expect to have rights that white people should even respect. And so this has kind of been a legal legacy, to say, look, I've been discriminated against, and I've been poisoned, and I've had my toothbrush put in somebody's butt simply because I'm a black person, and this person hates me for that reason, has always been sort of an uphill battle. And it's just, I don't know, it's just an indicator that we still have a long ways to go in just proving that we're human beings, yo. And that's sad to say in 2017, that the idea is that the idea that, you know, look, we're humans is something that we actually have to convince people of. Like, that's, but it you know, when you have this institutionalized idea in the society and in the culture, it's something that I don't know that, again, I go back to the problem in our country between whites and blacks is that whites have no idea what the black experience is. And this is more lopsided than to say the opposite, that whites, black people don't understand what the white experience is. White people truly do not understand what it is that black people deal with, even in this day and age. They don't understand what it's like to, every day you get in a car and you have to consider every day, you have to consider that you're going to be pulled over just simply because of your skin color, and that being pulled over for that reason might get you killed. And I'm not saying, and understand, I'm not saying that, if I speed, I might get pulled over and shot. I'm saying if I get in my car and I just drive down the street, I'm going to get pulled over, and that there's a 50-50 chance, that I might get shot. You don't know how many times that I've been pulled over just in 2017, and the person approaching my car, the police officer approaching my car, has flicked the snap on his gun, and I'm like, damn, like that, just that in itself. I don't, and these are for alleged traffic violations. Although the one time I did get pulled over for an actual violation that I admittedly did, but just the idea is that for a traffic violation, what I have to confront is a person who has got his gun ready to pull out and shoot me. And this is a reality that we see now more and more with the usage of, cell phones and things like that, where just, again, you were going to die because you might have, ran a red light or maybe pulled out too far into the intersection or these are things that white people don't understand because it doesn't happen to them. It just doesn't happen to them. I think most of you guys saw that video of that guy who was in the hotel, the white dude who was in the hotel with a woman friend or whatever, and the police was, told him to lay down, and they ended up shooting him because they told him to crawl to him, and they told him to put his hands up and crawl to him. And because the guy was like losing his balance, he put his hands down. And because he put his hands down, the police shot him. And I was like, my reaction was like, well, and I felt really messed up to have this reaction. But I was like, yep, we go through that all the time. Black people go through that all of the time. And I wonder, and I also felt a sadness because I knew that shooting wasn't going to be very controversial, probably because it was a white dude who got shot. And it's hard, the white people are not going to come out and say, well, he got shot because, of racism. And I don't know how hard of a sell it was to say, well, he got shot because that police officer shouldn't have had a gun and didn't know what the hell he was doing and was so trigger happy. I don't know how hard of a sell it is. Or maybe they just were like, yep, and we'll just quickly settle with that. But I just remember having all of these feelings like, man, this is, we go through worse than that. Because again, I tried to play devil's advocate. When I saw the dude's hands go down, I knew this is what they're going to say is the problem. Because I would be like, yep, if I were the police, I would be like, yep, in my opinion, I've already got a gun drawn on this dude. I'm yelling at the dude, and he put his hands down, and one of them went out of view, at least from the camera standpoint. I don't know what from the police officer's viewpoint, but from the camera standpoint, I could see one of the hands go out of view, and I knew I would be like, yep, that's what they're going to point to say that they thought he was in danger. Now, the stupidity of the police officer, in my opinion, this is my opinion because I'm not a cop, and I haven't gone through the training. I've been in firefights, but he had the dude laid prone and had the dude's hands laced behind his, so he could have done everything but make the dude get up and crawl, on his knees to him. That dude was prone. Perfect opportunity for an arrest, right? So I don't know that there was a better decision to be like, okay, I'm going to make him crawl to me. Like I don't know. But again, I know the circumstances when they went up on these guys. There was a report of a gun in the hotel room. Blah blah blah. The problem was they weren't in the hotel room. So if you have a prone suspect who doesn't look armed and you've got him prone with his hands interlaced behind his head, I don't know that it was a smart decision to then say, okay, crawl to me, and then shoot him because I think he has a gun. Like, I'm not going to make anybody crawl to me who I think has a gun. Like, that doesn't make sense to me. But anyway, so I want to segue from that Breonna thing to, because there's an issue with us as Black people trying to prove our humanity, right? And trying to show that we're human beings, although we shouldn't have to, right? Like, we shouldn't have to show that we're human. Like, I think it's, like, if I look at another Black person, I'm gonna be like, yep, they're human. Except that we actually do that amongst ourselves. Like, not only is this an issue of proving that we're human beings that are due certain rights, that are human rights and moral rights, but also legal rights, but we have a problem with that amongst ourselves, man. Right? Like, we have a problem with, and I understand why, because again, after 500 years of you're not a human being and having that sort of shoved down your throats, then the one thing that you're going to, if you don't think that you're a human being, then obviously the next person who looks like you, you're also not going to consider them a human being. So it's sort of this, it's sort of, I won't say it's Stockholm syndrome, but it is that brainwashing where if you believe that you are a nigger, then of course you're going to call the person who looks like you a nigger, right? That's just what's going to happen. If you think that you are a monkey, then you're going to look at the next person who looks like you and say, yeah, you're a monkey too. And then here's what's worse about that. If that person that you're calling a monkey doesn't think that they're a monkey, you're going to have some resentment. Yes, if you think that you're a monkey, and because now you're going to be like, how are you going to act like a human? We find this still today. Like, if you are Black and articulate and you like math, and then you are considered like acting white, right? Not acting smart, not acting human, and certainly not acting Black, which is the word. Like, you can't be Black and therefore smart and a nerd. Like, that is whiteness, right? And that is because of this residual dehumanization that we have sort of bought into. I wanted to segue that from Breonna and all of that into our holiday season of Kwanzaa. Because look, I have an extremely unpopular opinion about Kwanzaa. And let me give some let me give a precursor and some a prologue to this. I am clear that Kwanzaa is not like a religious holiday, so I don't necessarily equate it to like Christmas and Hanukkah and all of that. I don't. This is a cultural sort of thing. I look at Kwanzaa as a knee jerk. I look at it as a sort of like, if we view, like, obviously it's a it's a sort of a pro-Black and especially pro-Black power sort of perspective in terms of where Kwanzaa was born from and where it occupies where the space it occupies in Black thought. It is the antithesis, first of all, of Christmas, because if it wasn't, it wouldn't occur in this time of the year. And there's an idea behind it that says, well, Christmas is basically a white holiday. Because, interesting enough, like Christmas, at least in the United States, was not like our founding fathers didn't celebrate Christmas, or I won't just say the founding fathers, but even the first communities in this country, like, we didn't celebrate, like, Christmas was not a thing, right? It wasn't until like decades and decades later, after the founding of the United States, that Christmas became something of a cultural phenomenon, and I'm saying decades, not like 20 years. But uh, but the idea is that Christmas is this white thing, right? And so what we have to do as black people is have our own black Christmas. I mean, that's where it comes from in that thought process. And part of it is, and there's an envy behind that, because what happens is if you feel like you need to have your own holiday, then it's because you perceive what people are doing as something that you should do, but do it in your own way, right? So Christmas is this thing, and I say this as a Muslim. Like, I see Christmas and I see a lot of celebration. I see people getting together. I see a lot of food being cooked. I see presents being exchanged, and I know how that feels, right? Like, I understand, because I celebrated Christmas as a kid, right? So I know how that, and there's nothing bad or nefarious about that, right? It's not white. That's like human. And so what you do is you say, okay, I may not like, the foundation that rests on. Like, if I'm not Christian, then I'm not going to rock with the foundation of Christmas. And I don't believe in a white dude coming down my chimney. And if that does happen, first of all, I'm from the hood, so I ain't no chimneys. And if a white dude comes in, is popping up in your house in the middle, that ain't ever a good thing, right? And the stuff that he's got on his back is probably what he's stealing from you. So I understand why we reject those notions, right? But the idea of the joy, right, and the family and the love is something that you want to, we need that. We want that. So let's take that and put it somewhere else. Same time of the year, but let's call it something different, right? Now, in a general sense, there's nothing wrong with that, I don't think. I mean, celebrating joy and family and gift giving and all of that, there's nothing wrong with that. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with imitating that. So from a standpoint of what Kwanzaa is, from that standpoint, I got no issue with it. I think from a historical standpoint, I had an issue with Kwanzaa in the sense of, I think it's important for us to, as black people, that because we have this question mark in our heritage, right? You can only go so far, most of us can only go so far back into our history and our genealogy. And then there's a question mark because of slavery. Most of us. And unfortunately, when there have been at least examples put forth where somebody did that, like Alex Haley. He broke the mold. He was able to go back to Africa and find Kunta Kinte, and then you find out that was all bullshit. That was all a lie. You know what I'm saying? It just reinforces the fact that there is a question mark. And so what I think is important is, in the place of the question mark, I don't think that you should, because we don't like the question mark, none of us do, but we shouldn't make up something to replace the question mark. Because all of us, we had this hope with Alex Haley, and then we bumped into the reality is that none of us could do what Alex Haley, quote unquote, allegedly did. And why? Because it's impossible, right? At least to a degree. I think with Ancestry.com and tracing your stuff, from a genetic standpoint, that's opened the doors a little bit. But I don't know, and I don't think it's a good idea to replace a question mark in black heritage with another made-up story. And we've seen that time and time again, where we just make up stuff because we want to fill in the blanks and make ourselves more bona fide human beings. And I don't know that serves a proper purpose. Kwanzaa, the interesting thing about Kwanzaa is, again, Ron Karenga, made up this holiday, and he brought in elements that were, African. But again, it's the reality about Africa is that it's a continent, right? Where you're from in Africa is more important than the fact that you're from Africa, right? Whether it's, first of all human beings are from there, right? But it's much more important to be able to trace where you're from in Africa. than it is to be like, oh, I'm African in descent, because that's way too general, and way too simplistic. So simplistic that it's almost irrelevant, and especially in the actual sort of in the in, where the actual pattern and paradigm is. And so these elements of Kwanzaa, where it's like these elements of Kwanzaa, like especially like the Swahili, like a lot of Black people learn Swahili because of the Pan African movements, and it was like the reality is like most of us are from regions in Africa where Swahili was not existent. You had much more prevalent. You had other like linguistic tongues. Like Mende was probably the most prolific tongue for many of us in our background. Swahili was like on the other side, mostly like Central and like Eastern Africa, where most slaves were not from. So and then like the idea, look, the reality is like first fruits is not an African thing. In fact, you can find first fruit ceremonies among the ancient Greeks and the Romans and pagans. So it's not like, this wasn't like an African thing to be like, we need to celebrate first fruits. It's just agricultural. And I always thought it was interesting to take ideas of agriculture and try to insert them in a culture that's not agriculture. I mean, the Black American culture is not agricultural. It's not. And it's much more urban, in fact. We left the agricultural culture when we were like, we're leaving the plantation. So I always thought it was interesting to sort of try and put this back on a culture that is like has nothing, like we don't know much about that. A lot of us don't even have a green thumb to grow a house plant. So this idea of like first fruits and all of that is foreign as a concept. So then to try to make it and adopt it into a holiday by which somehow we link back to our African culture, I didn't think was the smartest thing. But even all of that, that's just my personal opinion, and I don't imagine that it's something that needs to be popularized or I need to influence people. But I do have one problem with this that I think that is sadly overlooked, and that is the actual creator of Kwanzaa himself, Ron Karenga. Because here's my thing. If you know the history of Ron Karenga, he was one of the founders of the Black nationalist group US, and they had a lot of conflict with the Black Panther Party. And one of the sad things, at least especially about the Black Panther Party and other sort of peripheral organizations, is that they imploded. And I'm saying imploded. They didn't explode. They imploded because there were a lot of personal integrity issues. Yes, J. Edgar Hoover and the FBI made Black activism similar to Islamic terrorism. It's clear that they targeted people like MLK and Medgar Evers and Jose Williams and all of these people simply because they wanted to be human beings and treated like such. And somehow J. Edgar Hoover, not somehow, he's a racist, felt like this idea in and of itself was anti-American and criminal. That's clear. And he did a lot, and the FBI did a lot in terms of disrupting the movements. But I think that what they did in reality was give us the rope by which we tied in the noose and hung around our own necks. That's pretty clear. There was so much infighting and distrust between people within their own organizations and certainly from organization to organization that was unnecessary. And it was unnecessary because underneath this want for human rights and the struggle for humanity was a lot of greed, a lot of misogyny, a lot of nihilism. And we never did anything to address that. And this is stuff that, and to a degree that we don't even really understand and really give just estimate to it. If you understood, like I mentioned earlier about Stokely going to Alabama, that whole movement, like the Freedom Summer, if you read some of the accounts of what went on in the South with these Northerners, like especially like, you know, how many white girls the brothers went down and had sex with, and that this created a whole lot of arguments between like the white girls who went with, you know, down there with ideas of helping the black people register to vote, and the sisters that were going, and the sisters that were there and seeing what the brothers did. Like, this is stuff that we don't really talk about because it's like a hidden history. And I think that these issues, like Ron Karenga, like us and Black Panther Party fought each other. And when I say fought each other, like people were getting killed. So this was like Crips and Bloods fighting each other. And these are people that are supposed to be ultimately about the empowerment of black people. And yet they start shooting each other, right? I mean, carrying out assassinations. And then you have the personal integrity issues. Everybody knows that Huey P. Newton, Huey was a crackhead. So was Ron Karenga. So now in you've got drugs that are fueling like paranoia and stupidity. And you had Ron Karenga in this mind state. And in the mind state, anybody who we felt was like a traitor, they would roll up and you wouldn't see them again. And one of the biggest cases, the case that he went to prison on, was the kidnap and torture of two women he thought were like after him. And he actually thought that they were trying to poison him with these magical crystals, which just, again, speaks to his drug-induced stupor and stupidity. But he tortured these women. Tortured them with irons and soldering irons, beat them with electrical cords, did the old Philippines thing, where they put water hoses down one of the woman's mouth and forced water into her, and then another woman who testified to this, like, sat on her stomach, this is you're doing this to your own people, okay? And then you go to prison, and whatever type of rehab or whatever, because I believe in that. I believe you do something jacked up and you can go through a redemptive process. I believe it because I would like to think I did it myself. But my problem with that is you have to speak to that, right? But what you do is you get out and you make up a holiday and you bring all these issues about unity and togetherness and intention, and you never talk about the fact that you tortured black women. Instead, you say, I didn't do it. And it's all a lie, and the government was out to get me, and I'm a political prisoner. And I'm supposed to swallow that. I'm supposed to be like, oh, this was all a fairy tale, because the government is so bad and so racist that I just need to ignore the fact that these women actually said you did that. I guess I'm supposed to ignore that Huey was a crackhead and sold drugs. I'm supposed to ignore all of this stuff because ultimately they're all lies, because it's, the government is so racist and so evil that I guess it's supposed to outstrip the racism and the evil that we perpetuate amongst ourselves. We're supposed to. Personally, I don't rock like that. So my issue is not so much with Kwanzaa as much as this idea of it's okay for us to victimize each other. It's okay for us to throw each other under the bus and then roll over each other. It's okay for us to screw each other over, to tell lies about each other, to inform on each other. I mean, it's a legacy. Malcolm X had probably half of his crew that we look at as, the vanguard of, black nationalism and black freedom, and half of them were the police. Half of them were the police. Fred Hampton, who was a martyr for the cause, was pointed out by a Judas of his own color. This dude gave the police, here's the layout to the apartment. Roll up in there and kill this dude. And then he got into a witness protection program. Like this is what we have, such a constant legacy of this. And I made a comment about Kwanzaa, a long comment, but it was like, and I honestly, like, I don't say anything. I don't express opinions that I expect everyone to agree with. One of the reasons, because I try to formulate opinions that go against convention anyway. I usually run down the street that most people are not going to go down, so I expect to have a difference of opinion. So I don't have a problem with that. What I find problematic is when I see this idea of it's okay that we do these things to each other because the greater good is really the issue. It's the greater good to celebrate Kwanzaa, and we should ignore the fact that Ron Karenga, and not the fact that he was a criminal, but it's not that he did what he did. I mean, of course, that's an issue, but it's the unrepentant, unremorse sort of let's skip over that type of thing. Because you can't then tell me we should be unified. You can't preach to me unity and coming together if you have this blood on your hands and you haven't done anything to wash it off. It was an issue when go back to Nate Parker. That was the problem I had with Nate Parker. It wasn't that he falsely accused of rape and blah, 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 blah. What was clear by his own admission was he was a 19-year-old black man who decided to gangbang a drunk white girl. I had a problem with that because that's what you need to talk about, especially the father of 2 daughters. Like, we need to talk about that type of stuff. But we don't. We brush that under the rug, and then we wonder why our efforts self-implode. Because I don't know that I could celebrate Kwanzaa and still have in back of my mind that the guy who came up with this would, like, torture my mother and then not say anything. Or torture my sister and not say anything. Or would take my daughter in the basement and flood her stomach with water and not say anything, but offer to pour libations for me. Like, that's an ironic idea of libations to me. Like, I don't know that I could do that. And I don't know that we should as black people. We gotta stop celebrating evil and self-mutilation for the sake of trying to, because, white people are racist. Like, don't tell me to buy an R. Kelly record because Elvis was a racist. Right? You know what I'm saying? Like, can we just not have R. Kelly screwing our little girls? Can we stop that? And can we call people out on that and hold them responsible for that? Because what I know that people are going to do evil. People are going to do wrong. I look in the mirror and that's very clear. But my issue is, can you stand up to that? And can you embrace that? And move into a direction of redemption and be honest about that. I would have loved Maulana Karenga to be like, yeah, I was so caught up in my drug addiction and I was so caught up in the anger and the paranoia and the ignorance and the stuff that comes with this struggle that I did things wrong and I shouldn't have. I would love to have heard that and I didn't do anything wrong. I'd love to hear Nate Parker say, this is how I overcome, or this is how we should deal with, or this is what I talk to my daughter about how we treat each other and how I was raised and why I came to the idea that it was okay to gangbang a drunk white girl. As opposed to, hey, look, I was found not guilty. I shouldn't talk about any of this. Go see my movie. Like, that's the stuff that I think as black people we need to talk about. And why I have an issue. Again, celebrating Kwanzaa is not an issue. I get it. But again, I don't know that overlooking the BS behind it does us any good. It doesn't. It really doesn't. We can do better and be better. So we're gonna take another quick break and then come back with our last segment of the show. Again, this is Hot Button. This is Brother Taj. We're on the DSOC Broadcast Network. Hang on, we'll be right back.
Do the uptown bounce, do the up, do the what, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the up, do the what, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the up, do the what, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown bounce, do the up, do the what, do the uptown bounce, do the uptown.
Let's go. Alright. Check me out. be till I tap the NPC to conduct as such. Breaking, that's what y'all gonna do. That means y'all break rule, cause y'all clearly touch bandmates. Chris Kirk is on the scene, the Hodge bass is mean, the drums is Kohlenberg. Breakout, epidemic seems to grow, breaks out from every show, cause this shit never hurt. Hip hop, instead some say it's whack, we need to bring it back and la-di-da-da. Music, it supplements the word and known to touch a nerve, so here's another bar. Passion, the passion of the mic, the passion of the nights, whatever that it be. Hold up, no need to be inside, just let the feelings ride. Come on and let's be free and just bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in now, bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in, bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in now, bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in, bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in now, bring it out. Hey, hey, bam, come on in, bring it out. Hey, hey, damn man, now bring it out. Hey, hey, we get it in. Now waiting, if you could, would you please? How many LMCs are capturing the mass? One hits, they do their little do for just a day or two, but then they never last. Ringtone, the labels cashing in, they think they're gonna win from this phenomenon. I'm thinking I'll do me, let the music carry me, let the music carry on. Work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in now, work it out, hey, hey, we get it in.
Yo. So we're back. It's Brother Taj and Hot Button. You're listening to me on the DSOC Broadcast Network. Again, broadcasting here at the Dayton Street Opportunity Center. We're on www.radio.zrock.org and also going to be rebroadcast at www.daytonstreetoc.com. All right, so let's talk about some entertainment stuff, man. Let's talk about movies, man. What's the last good movie you guys seen? I saw Bright. You guys saw Bright. I know a lot of people like that's been like the biggest buzz especially like in black cinema lately. I think Netflix was smart, obviously. I mean, Netflix is like, they're going after like the box office stuff, man. I think they were smart to grab up Will Smith. I think it was Will Smith's smarter move because, box office wise, it ain't been so great for him. Like there was a time where it was like, if we get Will Smith and do a Will Smith movie in the summertime, like around July, because that whole Independence Day thing, like it's all good. And then what's that Earth Beyond Earth or something that he did with his son? Oh my God, it was horrible. That movie, it was so bad. Like there aren't a lot of movies that I won't like finish. I didn't finish that movie, and I watched it like 3 times trying to, but it was just, it was like horrible, man. That movie was bad. Like the last Will Smith movie that I liked, and I think he's a great actor, to be honest. I think I enjoy that he came up as this popcorn rapper and really hit it out the park with his TV show, and then that translated into movie success. I really enjoy that. And I think like his portrayal of Muhammad Ali was just the pinnacle of his career. The last good movie I saw of his was 7 Pounds. Like that movie was it's probably in my top 10, man. And I hate, and I don't do drama. Like my stuff's got to have explosions and some assassinations and like a car chase. Like, and that movie didn't have any of that. But that was probably one of the best movies that I've seen, period. And almost, made me sniffle a little bit. Made my eyeball sweat, my left eye, watered up a little bit. It was, especially at the end, it was really, really a good movie. But like, I just, I don't know. I'm just disappointed in his last sort of, his offerings. But I do think that it was a smart idea for him, to snatch up this script and then throw in with Netflix. There was a lot of buzz. The general buzz that I see, especially like from people I know, a lot of my friends, associates, and everything, that it was a pretty good movie. I actually seen it twice so far. I don't know that it was as good as it was put out. like I don't know. It was okay. Maybe there were too many elements of what's that movie? 16 Blocks. And what's that Denzel joint that he did as the bad cop? That Denzel got the nomination for. Yeah, Training Day. Like I saw, it was too many elements of Training Day and 16 Blocks. That's what I thought it was. Even so much so, like the one brother Bone, the Blood, who's in Training Day, is also in Bright. Like, so I was like, oh yeah, clearly like somebody who was involved in that movie, a producer or somebody who was involved in that movie is clearly involved in this movie. So I kind of felt like, and then there was parts that were kind of like I was like, well, how did that happen? Just stuff that was like dumb. Like how the people that chase you, they catch you, right? They catch up with you, and then you go out the back door, and then somehow the next moment you're like 10 miles away. And I'm like, how did, like, they just were at the back door with you. So how did you even get that far away? That it was that type, like a couple of times that happened in the movie where I was just like, okay, like somebody's not paying attention to like simple continuity stuff. But I thought in a general sense, like I did like the idea of like melding fantasy with like reality and the orcs and the elves and all of that stuff. And this was clearly some, metaphors in terms of, race relations, because the orcs were black, people were like, yeah, the orcs were black people and the elves were the Jews. That was like, that was almost like overtly, like glaringly apparent. So I think there was some, and maybe a commentary on race relations for sure. And so in the general sense, I think I give the movie like a C plus. Like a C plus. I went in expecting to give it a D minus, to be honest. I give it a C plus. I'm not sure I'd give it like a B, but it's close. I think it was a good effort, and something to build on. Maybe there's a sequel involved. I'd like to see some of the story fleshed out a little bit. But I don't know. I think it was a good one-shot deal for Netflix, and for Will Smith in general. I seen Star Wars, the latest, The Last Jedi, which I thought was. So I have one. I don't want to give any spoilers, but the one thing I missed in this movie that I saw from other movies that I think should have been in this movie is like there's got to be more lightsaber fighting. You know what I mean? Like it's got to be like lightsaber versus lightsaber, where it's like, because those three, like especially the last two of that the second part trilogy, they had some really great scenes. Like when Yoda got busy with not Darth Sidious, but whatever, Peter Cushing or whatever the hell his name is. Yeah, I think I want to say Peter Cushing, but whatever. That scene was just dope. Like to see Yoda like get busy, like that was dope. And I think that they should, you have to capitalize on that. You really should never do a Star Wars movie where you don't have an amazing lightsaber versus lightsaber battle. And really this one, and even the last one, even the last Star Wars didn't have that. Like Rey and Kylo Ren's battle was whack, and there really wasn't really that epic battle in this last offering. And I'm hoping that they do in the next installment. Like you just got, come on, like especially when you have Luke Skywalker. Like we haven't seen Luke Skywalker really have a good battle since like Return of the Jedi. Right? Like, and then to me, it's just that's a waste of the character. You can't bring him back and then not have him have an epic lightsaber battle, like where everything just blows up. Like it just to me it was just a waste. But outside of that, I think it was a pretty good start for the next trilogy. Bringing in like new directors and stuff like that, and kind of revamping the story a little bit. There were some expectations I went in terms of seeing the movie that didn't pan out, which I was kind of happy to see. And I think I like to, sometimes movies are too predictable, and I like when they defy my expectations in terms of predictability. So this particular offering did do that in a general sense. So I'm ridiculously excited though for this Black Panther joint. Okay, so I'm a comic book nerd, so I've always I've always followed like all of the Black Panther, the Black Panther story. My thing about like the comic book world has always been like a focus on the black characters, which come and go, and they're always minor characters. I even have like when I was doing my my action figure collection, they're action figures, not dolls. My action figure collections were primarily like black characters, even like mundane ones. Like I had like Marlon Wayans character from the G.I. Joe movie. I don't have those characters, those action figures anymore because they got stolen from me. But that's a whole other story. The Black Panther character I followed as a comic book nerd when I was, especially as a kid, and so I thought it was really, the fact that he was created and used was both sort of like a progressive idea that I appreciated like Stan Lee for, but I also thought it was kind of pandering. Like Power Man, like Luke Cage was really like a caricature of blaxploitation, right? And I felt like, and then the fact that his character stayed in that way with the afro and the metal headband and the puffy disco shirt for like years, like never really changed. And I was just like, this is just so whack. He was like from a power standpoint, superpower standpoint, he was a major character that never really developed. So I always felt like he was like a token black character. And you had like Black Lightning and all of these, they were just like, on one hand, you felt like, okay, especially Stan Lee, like Stan Lee was progressive, I think, a lot more progressive than he's given credit for. But at the same time, I think he's a victim of circumstance and followed a lot of the status quo in terms of the era that he grew up in. And so like Black Panther was obviously an African, right? Because it's Black Panther. And, didn't have like really any major powers. He was just, a really acrobatic guy who had claws. It wasn't until sort of this latest update where he had this suit. There was actually a cartoon, like a rated R cartoon that I think really opened the way. And it was recent. Like I want to say like 2012, 2011 that this came out, where it was like pretty violent, pretty regret, and they really expounded on the story about what Wakanda was, this fictional place in Africa, and it wasn't just a country where this dude was, but they really put more on it. And I think that particular cartoon, it was a limited series cartoon, a series, but really gave birth to, let's make this guy a character in the movie Marvel universe, and let's give him a little bit more than, you know, the fact that he's, you know, he can, you know, do flips like a Negro. Like he's an athletic Negro. Let's do a little bit more and make it a little bit more. So I think it's a cool thing to see, not only him, you know, when he popped up in the Avengers, but that there was a deliberate, like, we're going to spin this off into a major movie. And when I say major movie, like the cast is all black except for like one of the a couple of villain characters.